Being a teenager has changed a lot. The world our children are growing up, it's completely different from the world we grew up in. There's TikTok, sexting, vaping. Our teenagers are constantly connected to their peers through their cell phones and social media. We haven't necessarily experienced this world, yet we are the ones trying to raise our teens and help them navigate it all. Well, my next guests are here to help. GP Dr. Ginny Mansberg and clinical psychologist Joe Lamble have written a book called The New Teen Age. And I tell you what, this could not have come at a better time for me. Ginny and Joe join me now. And if I can start with you, please, Joe. As a clinical psychologist, what impact have you seen on teenagers over the last 18 months or so when we've been dealing with COVID and lockdowns?
Yes, well, I'm hearing more and more that it's the social life. We know that teens, this is a time where their friends mean everything to them. And at this time, they're not getting to see their friends. So that's what they're really struggling with. And I'm hearing parents say, so what do I do? You know, I'm encouraging them to have a walk with a friend, because we're allowed to walk over here in twos if you're, within 5Ks if you're home. So, they're encouraging that, but the kids don't want that. They don't want to just go for a walk. They want to hang out with their friends. They want to be at school. So their moods are obviously suffering as a result of that. And then I was speaking to a parent on Friday who was saying, wow, I never thought I'd do this, but my 15-year-old daughter, I'm letting her boyfriend sleep over and become her intimate partner, which I never would have done at that age. And I never, she's not coping. She's refusing to exist because of this inability to just catch up in a normal and let some relationship develop at a normal pace. So there are all these elements that to me are often centered around this missing out on their social life.
Parenting teens in the modern age, that's what this book is about. How much is different when it comes to parenting? How different is it from 20 to 50 years ago? I mean, some aspects of parenting is exactly the same, but there are definitely changes, aren't there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what is the same is the biology, right? We know that teenagers have different changes in their hormones and in their brains that are basically directed in towards them becoming adults, competent adults, and separating from the family. That's what they're meant to do. I mean, 100 years ago, a 16-year-old would have been married off and become a mum, within a couple of years. And so these days, that's all the same. What is really different is the access to technology and, maybe some of the more liberal values that we have that have been really good in so many ways. And so many kids have really benefited from that. But if you think about when we were kids, if you needed to speak to a friend, the school gates opened at 9 and you were tossed out at 3. You had some access at lunchtime. Otherwise, you had to call the family phone and, run the gauntlet of, Mrs. Jones and having to have a conversation with her, and everybody wanted the same phone. So you got 5 minutes of access. These kids almost have unfettered access to each other 24/7. And it makes for some very intense friendships and a lot of very tired kids as well, because this is really eating into their sleep time and also their family time.
And Joe, are we the first generation of parents dealing with raising teenagers in a world that was nothing like ours?
Well, yes, and particularly, I mean, even Ginny and my kids are in their 20s. So, the social media was just kicking off when our kids were sort of finishing school. So even that's changed. Even in the sort of 10 years, there's been another change. So there's this constant evolution. I think that's what's different with parenting these days, is that we're trying to parent our children in the same way we were parented. So we were allowed only to watch television for a certain limited time, and we're only allowed to watch certain shows, and sometimes the television was off or you weren't allowed in the room when it was on. But so parents are thinking, okay, well, I'll do that again. That's what we'll do with all this screen time. We'll just limit it to 2 hours and we'll tell them what they can't look at. But it doesn't work like that. As Ginny said, they've got 24/7 access to this. So the same ways of parenting don't always work. And the other one that to me has changed, what I see is countless times a day I will hear a parent say to me, oh my gosh, I would never question my parents. I would never talk to my parents like that. And they're not even talking about being abusive. Of course, no one's going to tolerate abuse in any generation. But it's just that question. Kids these days have opinions. They're quite well researched and educated, and they're willing to have a discussion. And that's great. And we need to embrace that and use their new, I think, improved ability to communicate to work out, okay, how can we go with them? How can we go on this journey with them to teach them how to be a wonderful adult, how to be a great digital, responsible citizen online? How can we work together? Because let's face it, we're learning just as rapidly, or maybe a little bit behind they are.
Ginny, social media has changed the landscape. How should a parent deal with it?
So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all answer there. So for anybody who goes and buys the New Teen Age that Jo and I have written together, there are very few didactic do this, do that. There are a couple like no violence, there are a couple, but on the whole, what we say is your child, you are the parent, you know them very well, and that what works for one 15-year-old won't work for another 15-year-old. But there are a couple of things that you need to stay on top of. Number one, if you say you are not allowed on Facebook because some police person has come to the school and told you that if your child is on Facebook, they'll meet a pedophile and die. Number one, they don't care about Facebook. They've moved on and they're, on countless other apps that you don't know about. But number two, that's not true, and they know that, and you look like an idiot. So what they're going to do is go behind your back and start using social media apps without your permission. And then that sets up a culture of division and anger and lying, which is exactly what you do not want to encourage in your children from a values perspective. So it's probably better for you to understand what is motivating them, why they want to be on the social media, which is going to really center around your connectedness and your ability to talk to your kids and communicate with them and understand what's going on for them. If all of their social life has moved on to a particular app, then you don't really want to withhold that from them, because that's their way of communicating. And plus, they're all on their laptops anyway, all day, every day for school, particularly in lockdown. So what you want to do, probably, rather than trying to rule it and govern it, is to slowly loosen the guardrails and empower them with the ability to make really good decisions. And there will be some mistakes. There will be some mistakes. And as much as we love our children, we cannot prevent every single mistake they're ever going to make. But we want to work collaboratively with them and with others that are out there in the community to help them to make sure that they stay safe. We want to maintain that connection, and we want to tell them, look, let's give this a shot. I'd love to see you having unfettered access to Instagram or to Snap, and let's see how we go. But obviously, if that all goes to custard, we're going to have to think about paring it back. But I would not have a one-size-fits-all really rigid rule system around this that is going to isolate your child.
Jo, the consequence of making a mistake as a teenager now is so much worse with cell phones and social media. Those mistakes end up online for all to see, which can just be so humiliating. How, as a parent, would you deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, and that word humiliating is the key there, because we know that one single act of humiliation can be enough to cause serious self-harm or even suicide. So we want to do all we can to limit that humiliation. So if you find out that your child has made that mistake and they come to you, and inside you might be just absolutely freaking out, you want to, on the outside, reassure them, show them that they are loved and there is no judgment, and you are going to help and support them through what will be a crisis, but that you'll get through it together. The worst thing you could do is further that humiliation by trying to think of what punishment you can do. Okay, well, let's get you off, or every screen so this won't happen. But as Ginny said, you may say, hey, look, we might need to pare that back a bit because it sounds like things are a bit tough at the moment. So why don't you take a little social media break and just hang out with family and close friends until you get through that. So in other words, it's heaps of empathy, it's no judgment, and it's a plan together. Okay, what do you want to do? And I'll be right beside you while you do it, to get through what hopefully will be a short-lived crisis, but a very, very hard lesson.
How do we deal with sexting, Jo? How do we talk to our teenagers about it in a way that they'll listen to us?
A lot of parents disagree with us when we talk like this, because there is this common belief, which is wrong, that if we talk about sexting, or if we talk about sex, or if we talk about drugs, or if we talk about suicide with our children, that will be encouraging all those behaviours. But that's not true. No research backs that up. In fact, they can say that if children feel understood and we're willing to have those discussions, and that will keep them safe. or safer. So when it comes to sexting, it's good to say, okay, look, I hear this is going on. We all know it's going on. So again, we've got a little suggestion in the book that comes from one of the many experts we spoke to, who said, okay, how can you help your child? If you're going to do this, how can you do it in a safe way? So how can you do it without showing your face, showing a sensual issue that's not sexual? That how can you just do it in a cheeky way, but not something that could be used and shown and shared all around? So giving them some tips that if you feel like you're going to do this, then there are safer ways to do it. There are always decisions you can make at every fork in the road that may lead you down a better path.
Ginny, what are the hardest years for girls and boys? I've been really taken back at some of the situations my daughter and her peers had to deal with in year 7, sort of situations that I thought would be years away.
I agree. I think it's really interesting that the problems that we used to encounter ourselves maybe in year 10 are facing our kids in year 7 and 8. And I agree with you, Francesca. I think definitely teenage years are getting, earlier, the problems that they're having are getting earlier. And that partly is because they have that access to social media and looking into the lives of people that they, worship who are a little bit older than them. And also that 24/7 unfettered access to each other. So I think that those are the really intense years, but in some ways it's the years leading up to the teenage years where you set the tone in your household of communication and empathy and compassion that will really help you in those years so that they do come to you. We do know, actually, Jo and I were both fascinated by research that shows that we think as parents that our kids don't want to have anything to do with us and that they'd rather tell anybody but us their concerns, their secrets, their fears, their most humiliating and embarrassing moments. But actually research shows it is us, their parents, that they want to turn to. What an amazing situation to be in. It's really easy to harness that and to make sure we're just doing the right, couple of little tweaks to make sure that we make it really easy for them to do what they want to do, which is come to us.
Ginny, how do we know what is normal these days? We've got parents swirling around their kids like helicopters. We understand so much more about mental health these days. And we're seeing a lot more anxiety and depression and eating disorders in our teens. When, as a parent, should we get help? How do we separate out the worried well from a real problem?
What a fantastic question. Jo and I are really passionate advocates for collaboration, not only with your kid, but also with the amazing resources around you. And believe it or not, that often comes from the school. I think you are not Robinson Crusoe. Whatever is happening for your children, there are people within the school who are experienced, willing and able to help, and that might be a great resource. We think GPs are a fantastic resource, and GPs are often able to say, look, I'm a bit out of my depth, I'm going to refer you to a psychologist, someone like Jo, or they're going to reassure you, I see this 7 days a week. If you are not sure, please reach out and get help. And if what you're hearing doesn't sound right, because there's still a lot of really bad, advice for parents of teenagers out there, just kind of that, lock them away, throw away the key, make sure that they're not allowed out, control their friends, make sure that you have their, Facebook handle. Well, newsflash, there actually is no Facebook for them. There is a lot of really bad advice. If you're hearing advice you don't agree with, maybe go and get a bit of other advice.
Jo Lamble, Dr. Ginny Mansberg, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you very much for the book.
Thank you.
Thanks, Francesca.
And The New Teenage is available online from bookstores now. It's also available as an audiobook.